In this video, you're going to learn how you can track transaction with the enhanced e-commerce tracking functionality of Google Analytics. And we'll install all this with the help of Google Tag Manager. All and more coming up, so let's dive in. Hi there, and welcome to another video of MeasureSchool.com, where we teach you the data-driven way of digital marketing. My name is Julian, and today we want to talk about how you can track enhanced e-commerce tracking transactions within Google Analytics with the help of Google Tag Manager. And we have done this before in another video because there are actually two distinct methods of capturing transactions. One is the classic e-commerce tracking functionality within Google Analytics, and the second one would be the enhanced e-commerce tracking functionality within Google Analytics. Now, I won't be able to explain all of the different integrations you would need to do to get a complete understanding of enhanced e-commerce tracking. But if you're interested in a more comprehensive course about this, I'm actually thinking about building one just for this purpose. Please signalize your interest at measureschool.com/enhanced e-commerce tracking course. But today we want to talk about just the transaction tracking part of the enhanced e-commerce tracking. And this is actually what I would recommend to install if you are thinking about installing e-commerce tracking on your website. So instead of the classic e-commerce tracking, I would recommend to start out with the enhanced e-commerce tracking, although you might not install the whole enhanced e-commerce tracking functionality. So let's get started. First of all, we would need to prepare our Google Analytics account to receive this enhanced e-commerce tracking data. How would we do this? We would go over to Google Analytics, and in the admin section, under our view settings, we'll find e-commerce settings, and we need to enable e-commerce, but also enhanced e-commerce, which we can do in the next step. We can also put in our checkout labeling, which we will ignore in this video because we are only installing the transaction tracking of the enhanced e-commerce capabilities. Let's submit this, and Google Analytics is now ready to receive our data. All right, on our demo shop, we have Google Analytics installed and Google Tag Manager. Now we want to add to this our transaction tracking. There need to be two things in place in order to do this. One is a correct data layer, and the second are the right tags that forward the information on to Google Analytics. So let's talk about the data layer for a second. The data layer would need to be installed on the final checkout page where the data of the purchased items are available. So in our case, that would be the thank you page. So let's go through a checkout process really quickly. And we get to the checkout page where we will have the data available to send on to Google Analytics, such as the product that was bought, the total amount that was paid, the order number, and so on and so on. Now on this page, we would need to install a code that carries the information. And if you do this with Google Tag Manager, we would install it into our data layer, which is a central repository for all our data hidden from the user, but visible to Google Tag Manager. And what we need to install exactly is documented in the enhanced e-commerce tracking help section, where we have our developer guide on how to install enhanced e-commerce tracking. Now, as I said, there are many different data layers to implement to have the full functionality of the enhanced e-commerce tracking available. We are only going to talk about the transaction tracking, which is the purchase action within the enhanced e-commerce tracking. So let's click on this, and we actually get the data layer, or the data layer push, that needs to be sent out on our thank you page, and values need to be dynamically replaced, such as the ID would need to be replaced with our order number, the revenue with our total here, and so on and so on. Now, installing this can be done in several ways. You could do it right through the backend of your system by editing the template files and replacing dynamically the values of those fields with the actual value of the transaction. You could also install a plugin that provides that data by default, or send this documentation over to your developer to have him implemented this data layer. But be aware, you can't just copy it and paste it into your template, because then the products and the online store and all these values would stay the same. You need to have a dynamic replacement of these values. Luckily, we are on WordPress and WooCommerce here, and there's a very good plugin by Thomas Geiger, which is the Duracell Tomi Google Tag Manager plugin, which I have installed on my WordPress website, and it gives you a lot of functionality on the implementation of Google Tag Manager, and fortunately also under the integrations in WooCommerce functionality, we can turn on the track enhanced e-commerce data, which will transfer the data into our data layer automatically. So let's check out what is in the data layer. Let's go over to Google Tag Manager and actually go into the preview and debug mode and go through a transaction again. We get to the thank you page, and we can look with our preview and debug mode into the data layer and the data that is available. Now we see here, this is a big object that was pushed into the data layer with the key GTM4WP order completed. And we have an e-commerce object available with the data that we need for enhanced e-commerce tracking. This is modeled after what we see here in the data layer push of the official integration. Now, if you see any problems here, that's something that happens quite often. You would need to make sure that it's modeled after the official documentation here in order for our enhanced e-commerce tracking to work. Now, all we need to do is send that data on to Google Analytics. How would we do that? Let's go over to Google Tag Manager and create a new tag. This will be a Google Analytics tag, which will send an event with our enhanced e-commerce tracking data of the transaction over. Let's go with Google Analytics here, and we are going with Universal Analytics. I have a tracking ID prepared in our variables. If you don't know how to install this, please Google for the Google Analytics ID. My video will pop up. And then we choose the track type of event. Now, sending data over for enhanced e-commerce tracking will not require you to send over a transaction track type. You can send it either with an event or a page view, but this data needs a carrier. In our case, we already have the page view tracking installed, so I don't want to duplicate the page view on the thank you page. I want to send in an event to transport that data to Google Analytics. So let's go with event here. And then we can fill out anything that we want, but please be sure to fill out the category and action. I usually call this my enhanced e-commerce tracking data. And then the action would be a purchase. I will set the non-interaction hit to true because I don't want this tag to affect my bounce rate. And then under the more settings, I have e-commerce tracking features available, and I can enable the enhanced e-commerce tracking features. Now you can choose to use a variable, but in our case, we'll use the data layer because the data is available here. Let's continue and fire this tag upon a new trigger. And what will this trigger be like? Let's go back. We see our data here, and we want to be able to trigger our tag when that data is available. And the actual checkpoint for this is an event. And we have an event available here, which is the GTM4WP order completed. Let's copy that and go back to Google Tag Manager and choose custom event. And as the event name, we simply put our GTM4WP order completed. We'll call this trigger the transaction trigger. And we don't need to add in any filters because this is pretty unique to this website. Let's create this trigger and create this tag. Refresh and go through another conversion again. here we go. And we see that upon our first GTM4 WP order, our GA event EE transaction has fired correctly. Now we can look into that. Unfortunately, we don't see any very revealing information about our sent enhanced e-commerce tracking data. And unfortunately, we are also not able to see any sign of our enhanced e-commerce tracking in the real-time reporting. But we would be able to see that an event came through and be sure that our enhanced e-commerce tracking data was sent. It takes a while to populate then in our conversion reports under Ecommerce. You would have your enhanced e-commerce tracking reports available, where you also have your sales performance report, where your transaction should be showing up within the next half hour to 48 hours. Please be patient for this. The other reports will not be filled by default. You will need to install the full enhanced e-commerce tracking functionality. At the end, don't forget to publish your version so it goes out to all your users. So this was a quick overview on how to install enhanced e-commerce transaction tracking with the help of Google Tag Manager. If you are interested in building out the full enhanced e-commerce tracking on your website, please signalize your interest at measureschool.com/enhanced e-commerce tracking course. And that's already it with this week's video of measureschool.com. I hope you enjoyed it. And if you like this video, please subscribe to this channel so we can bring you more videos every week. My name is Julian. Till next time.